Everything around her is quiet. There is no sound except for the occasional glup, glup of air struggling upward. It is incredibly peaceful in this place with no other person around. But there are other features in this place that are pulsing with life. Red and gold coral reef goes up to one side of her like the Great Wall of China. All around and within it are schools of brightly colored fish of all sizes and shapes. An orange crustacean with antenna-like eyes floats just before her vision, just before a great cloud of fish surrounds it and her, and then they all disappear. Sue Austin floats forward and upward and sometimes downward and all around the great coral reefs. But she is no ordinary deep sea diver. Rather than a rubber suit, she is swimming in a sundress. Her red hair floats out behind her in long, slow, billowing tendrils. And on top of this swimming and searching under the depths, there's something else that's different here, something truly unexpected. Sue Austin is exploring the ocean in an underwater wheelchair. An underwater wheelchair. You can see a picture of her on the front of the order of service. Now, this is not the typical association that most have with a wheelchair. As Sue Austin said in a TED Talk about her art and her experience, when she first started using a wheelchair because of physical limitations, she felt as though a cloak of invisibility had settled over her. People ignored her and pretended that she was not there. When she began asking people about their mental associations with the wheelchair, they came up with limitation, lack of freedom, even pity. It was not a desirable thing to have as a part of one's life, not by any stretch. But Sue became curious. So she began using her wheelchair to make art. And she would paint these long and winding tracks that went alongside her wheelchair as she would wind her way down streets and pathways. These paths showed the unpredictable and surprising distances that she was able to cover in her chair. And when she did that, people began to see her in her wheelchair in a different way. They began to see freedom and possibility rather than limitation and lack of freedom. So Sue began to wonder again, what if she took something that was traditionally associated with limitation and restriction and something traditionally associated with adventure and excitement and then smashed the two together? This creative inclination is what led to the underwater wheelchair. The image of Sue floating through the sea in her chair is so provocative and alluring, inspiring, and even maybe a little disorienting. Our expectations of people with disabilities are being undone by her work. The ruts of our perception are being broken open. It's beautiful and imaginative and opens a new side to humanity, I think. Now, many parts of our culture are not built for embracing that sort of creativity, that sort of breaking open of perception. even things that seem like they might be primed to open new doors of experience and innovation for discovering new depths to our humanity, are often organized to limit experiences rather than expand them. I have a friend who works for a major internet company, and her job is to personalize searches. She told me that this is a science and is being continually focused to narrow results in more and more nuanced ways. For example, some search engines are now showing products that I might like to purchase only at the times of day and even times of year when I tend to browse them. It tracks that degree of specificity. So basically, my days and weeks and years are being organized and punctuated by products that I have purchased in the past and recommendations for what I might like. Now, so of course, some part of me appreciates this at 9 p.m. on a Saturday night when I want to purchase last-minute candy for my brother's birthday on Amazon. But it also disturbs me as an example for how narrow our lives can become when they are determined by the regurgitation of our past. Human perception can operate out of ruts, and these ruts go deep. Recently, an NSUC member sent me an article about storylines and book plots. He wanted to know what I thought about it. It's written by the Jungian analyst Christopher Booker, and it argues that every story that we tell can be reduced to a few simple structures or plots. And these are structures or plots that we just keep repeating to each other, but in slightly different forms. Essentially, we repeat these structures to ourselves, finding ways to retell the same story again and again. He names these plots Rags to Riches, The Quest, Overcoming the Monster, Comedy, Tragedy, Rebirth, and Voyage and Return. He says they can all be reduced to those 7 plots. Now, I'm just going to mention the last one so that we have a sense of what he's talking about. The Voyage and Return structure basically goes like this. The character must travel to a strange and unfamiliar land. The character feels threatened and overwhelmed. The character suddenly returns to her old life with new perspectives. And finally, the character's initial circumstances improve. That's it. That's the Voyage and Return. Hence, you get The Wizard of Oz, you get Lord of the Flies, you get Shakespeare's The Tempest, you get The Odyssey, and you get Robinson Crusoe. The characters change and the settings are different, but the structures are hardwired. Christopher Booker praises these things, going so far as to say that the repetition of these archetypal storylines are what give our otherwise crude existence order and meaning. They form the deep substrate for how we interpret the world. There's something to be said for this view, I think, but I also wonder about its limitations. In a recent interview, the film director Alex Garland addressed the same issue. He says it is helpful to think of these kind of story structures as rituals. In other words, we give ourselves over, when we hear one of these stories or we see it portrayed in a film, we give ourselves over to the ritualistic retelling of the standard plot, which recreates and reinforces the structure of the world that we are already primed to see. Sort of like the mythological retellings that punctuated the year for our ancient ancestors. These stories then create the ruts in our perception that allow us to view, interpret, and predict the world and how things will turn out. Garland does not believe that these things, these stories, these structures can be wholly dispensed with, but he does find it aesthetically limiting. This interview was conducted in response to his new film, Annihilation, which attempts to break the mold of those standard stories. In this movie, which is based on a trilogy of books called the Southern Reach trilogy, it is one of my favorite science fiction series. I highly recommend it. But in this film and in the book, miles of land in northern Florida have been taken over by some strange presence. It is both beautiful and deadly, shimmering and terrifying. The characters do not know whether this thing is alien or supernatural or an unexplained natural phenomenon. The closer they get to it, the more it unravels human understanding and expectation and experience. The story doesn't end heroically or tragically, comedically, or with a rebirth. I would argue that the film does not fit neatly into any of the traditional storylines that Brooks articulates. It contains elements of some of those plots while unraveling them at the same time. It is intentionally trying to break free from the ritual repetition that characterizes so many of our films and books and ways that we see the world. I admit I am a fan. I liked it. I thought it was compelling and beautiful and trying to do something new. But not surprisingly, not everyone agreed with that assessment, and many people hated its experimental form. And it should be no surprise that such creative license is not always rewarded. I'm going to change gears here a bit because I want to argue that more is at stake in this conversation than aesthetic considerations. When we are able to open ourselves to new experiences and new ways of perceiving, when we're able to break out of those ruts in our perception, I think that we just might discover something life-saving. Here's an example. Many of you know that there is a giant plastic island floating in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. Formed from the detritus of the United States and China and other countries, it is called the plastic patch and is today twice the size of Texas. Let that sink in, twice the size of Texas. Now, so far, most of the solutions that people have proposed to this problem have been about recycling and reducing plastic. And I admit that until recently, I believed the story that the patch would be an inevitable and permanent feature of the Pacific Ocean going forward, and the best that we could do would be to slow its growth. However, in the last year or so, someone invented a machine that acts like a whirlpool to collect plastic that is floating in the ocean. You can see images of this if you Google it on the internet. It was the first time that I thought, wow, maybe there is not only a possibility that we humans can slow the growth of the great plastic patch, but perhaps we can also create something that reduces or even eliminates it. We're far from having that solution for a patch that's that big. The machine is not that big. But the possibility is now there. Someone took the narrative that we have, that there's nothing to be done about this inevitable patch of waste except maybe slow its growth, and they broke it. They broke it. The rut and the ritual gave way to possibility. And it just might be a possibility that is life-saving. And heaven knows that there are so many other situations that need us to break open our perceptual limitations, including the situation with Israel and Palestine and the ongoing crisis of school shootings in our own country. We desperately need people to break out of the ruts of perception that we're stuck in around these issues. So how do we take this home and make it ours? An NSUC member recently said to me, "Lucas, I love your sermons, but I don't always know what to do with them." So here's my answer for this one. What if we made it something of a spiritual discipline to start looking outside of the ruts of our experience? There are indeed so many times every day when it seems as though the universe is reaching out, offering itself to us, opening new prospects. It is a question of whether we will say yes to those things that will open a new possibility, a new way of understanding, or rather return to the same rut. What if we made it a daily intention to find those experiences that challenge and provoke us? What would that look like? It might mean reading poetry when we have never done that before, or saying yes to a new encounter with a stranger, or watching a genre of film that is outside our normal comfort zone. What if we made it a habit to act, what ritual or rut can I break today? It's an important question because I think that when we're able to open ourselves to these experiences, to the things that upset and disrupt our lives and our understandings, that may be precisely where the creative, the beautiful, and the new will show up for us and for our world. There lies the possibility for life's creative advance. So in this provocative and disruptive spirit, I leave you with a warning. It's from the writer Eileen Gooder. She says, now remember, you can live on bland food so as to avoid an ulcer. Drink no tea or coffee or other stimulants in the name of health. Go to bed early and stay away from the nightlife. Avoid all controversial subjects so as to never give offense. Mind your own business and avoid involvement in other people's problems. Make sure that you are never seen with the wrong people. Spend money only on necessities and save all you can. And then you can still break your neck in the bathtub, and it will serve you right. So let us find new ways to live fully and creatively today, accepting the gifts that life has to offer us. Because there are so many. I am so grateful for each and every one of you. I love you. Amen.